My pool water hadn't even finished gurgling out the side drain when the first scream hit me like a slap. "You flooded the neighborhood, you imbecile," came the voice of doom wrapped in pink liquor and rage. There she was, Karen, clipboard in hand, wild blonde bob flaring in the breeze like a golden siren of chaos. The water wasn't even reaching the sidewalk, but to her, it may as well have been a biblical flood, and right there in front of my eyes, karma began brewing beneath her feet. That Saturday had started off perfect. I, Jackson Reed, had finally set aside time to drain and clean out my pool, something I hadn't done in years. Between work, my kids visiting every other weekend, and HOA board meetings that felt more like Inquisition trials, I hadn't had the bandwidth to deal with it. But I was finally free. The sun was warm, the power washer was primed, and I had a cooler full of cold drinks ready to go. Life was quiet, peaceful even, until the pink tornado blew in from next door. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA, stormed into my yard like she was executing a SWAT raid. She didn't knock, she didn't yell from the gate. She just marched through, heels stabbing at my grass, snapping pictures on her phone like she caught a fugitive in the act. Her rant started off with violation of Article 13, Section C regarding water disposal, and escalated to a full-blown accusation of environmental terrorism. I didn't know whether to laugh or offer her a glass of water. I tried explaining that the draining was city-approved and hooked directly into the residential runoff line per code. She didn't want to hear it. "You people think you can do whatever you want just because you own your home," she snapped, which was ironic coming from someone who'd fined another neighbor for having a plastic flamingo in their yard. She clicked her pen aggressively and promised a full citation review and community-level remediation request. I had no idea what that even meant, but the way she said it, it sounded like I just committed a war crime. I was still shaking my head and trying not to laugh when the real drama began. A sudden whoop echoed from 2 houses down, followed by a strange bubbling sound. We both turned to see a neighbor's perfectly manicured lawn ballooning upwards, like it had swallowed a trampoline. Then came the geyser. An eruption of water, dirt, and what looked like old coffee grounds blasted 4 feet into the air. The neighbors screamed, a dog barked. Karen clutched her pearls and shrieked, "See what you've done." That's when I knew something wasn't adding up. I walked down the block to see the mess. Several folks had come out of their houses now, all muttering and pointing. I overheard someone say, "It's like the pipes burst or something." I told them what I'd been doing, just draining my pool the standard way, and that I hadn't touched anything connected to their system. Karen was pacing in circles now, barking into her phone, probably summoning her personal army of code enforcers. The plumber arrived surprisingly fast. Maybe someone had emergency status or just really good Yelp reviews. A guy in a blue jumpsuit with a tool belt started examining the hole and the bubbling mess. "Weird," he muttered, checking his phone and then squinting at the ground. "That ain't a residential drain, that's a stormwater bypass." He pulled out a small probe and stuck it in. Karen rushed over and started ranting again, until he held up a hand like a traffic cop and said, "Man, you need to stand back." This could be a contamination hazard. That shut her up for a second. The plumber, who introduced himself as Diego, looked over at me and asked if my pool drained into the gutter or straight into the yard. I showed him the flexible hose connected to my legal side outlet. He nodded and said, "Yours is fine. This," he pointed at the bubbling crater, "this ain't got nothing to do with you. Someone hooked something they weren't supposed to into the wrong pipe." Karen's face froze. I swear I could see the exact moment her brain tried to calculate escape velocity. Her mouth opened like she was about to defend herself, but nothing came out. She just turned around and walked back to her house like she remembered the oven was on. Diego raised an eyebrow at her and muttered, "Suspicious." That's when the first weird thought hit me. Why did the geyser only affect that specific area down the block? Not near my runoff, not near the normal residential drains. Only the line that ran straight past Karen's backyard. I stood there, arms crossed, watching the mess bubble and spit, and something told me this wasn't just about my pool. I went home and started looking through my old paperwork. When I bought the house, I'd had to pull permits for all sorts of things, including water lines. That was when I remembered something odd from the city diagram. My runoff line was marked and approved, but there was also a red flag near Karen's lot, something about a temporary construction hookup from back when her house was first built. It was never meant to be permanent. I had brushed it off back then, figuring it had been resolved. But now something stank, and it wasn't just the muddy water burping up from the sidewalk. The next morning, I walked around to Karen's street-facing side. Her backyard fence was locked, but what caught my eye was the trail. Little muddy footprints leading from her back gate out to the sidewalk, like someone had been moving stuff late last night. Bags of dirt? Pipes? I couldn't tell, but something about the scene felt too clean, too carefully managed, and that's when the idea hit me. If I set up a motion-triggered trail cam on the back corner of my yard, I might be able to see if Karen was hiding something. After all, if she was innocent, she had nothing to worry about. But if she had connected her house's waste lines, or worse, pool or kitchen runoff, to a pipe that didn't belong to her, let's just say I was about to find out the hard way that this wasn't just an HOA fight anymore. This was going to get dirty, and Karen had no clue what kind of mess she had flushed herself into. The following morning I stood by my side fence, sipping coffee and eyeing the small motion-triggered trail camera I'd zip-tied discreetly to the wooden slat facing Karen's backyard. It wasn't much, just a weatherproof cam I'd used once to catch raccoons in the trash. But it had night vision and motion detection, which was more than enough for what I needed. I didn't want to accuse her of anything without evidence, but something in my gut told me this situation was way bigger than a neighbor feud over pool water. This wasn't just Karen being her usual overbearing HOA self. This felt like someone trying to hide something very illegal. By midday, a second plumber showed up down the block, one hired by the HOA itself, or more likely, by Karen, to shift blame elsewhere. He was older, a little out of shape, and wore a vest with a local plumbing company logo on it. Karen stood beside him, talking fast, pointing toward the broken patch of lawn, then back toward my yard, like she was trying to reconstruct a crime scene that didn't exist. I stayed silent, observing from my porch. I didn't interfere. I just watched. The plumber, who called himself Theodore, gave her the same response Diego did. The geyser was not caused by anything on my property. He even followed the drain line with a ground sensor and confirmed mine was properly routed into the city-permitted runoff system. But then he paused at the edge of Karen's lot and tilted his head, tapping his probe on the ground. I couldn't hear what he said, but Karen visibly tensed. She waved her arms, she pointed back toward her house, and then, strangely, she seemed to be arguing with Theodore. The whole time she kept glancing toward me like she thought I was recording her, which of course I was. That night, after dinner, I retrieved the trail cam card and loaded the footage onto my laptop. At first, it was nothing but wind-blown leaves and the occasional bird. But then, just after midnight, the motion alert triggered. A man in dark overalls entered from Karen's back gate, carrying what looked like coiled tubing. He was followed by another figure, a woman with a flashlight. Karen. They moved with urgency, setting down the tubing and digging in the soft dirt behind her hedge. It looked like they were trying to uncover a section of buried pipe. One frame even showed her holding a small flashlight in her mouth, her hands inside what appeared to be a junction box. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. She wasn't just illegally hooked into a line. She was actively tampering with it in the middle of the night. And this wasn't a panicked fix. This was a professional-level cover-up. The next morning, I went to the city office and requested access to the utility layout plans again. I told the clerk I was a homeowner checking pipe placements, which wasn't a lie. When they pulled the latest records, one thing stood out immediately. Karen's house, according to the diagram, had no approved connection to the city's stormwater bypass line. The only legal hookup was to her residential sewage, which was meant for indoor waste only. But her backyard drain system, completely unregistered. There was even a handwritten note on an older permit application that said, "Denied. Storm connection intended for industrial use only." My hands tightened around the printout. She knew. She had known for years. I walked straight from the city office to the HOA board secretary's house. An older gentleman named Ron who had seen more drama than any man should have to endure for a volunteer position. I told him I had reason to believe Karen had connected her property illegally and showed him the video stills. He didn't say a word for a full minute. Then he sighed and muttered, "I always knew she was hiding something." That week, at the HOA's monthly meeting, Karen strutted in like nothing had happened. She passed out paper agendas, welcomed the board with her usual fake cheer, and began with unresolved violations, her favorite segment. She wasted no time calling me out. She stood, arms crossed, and read aloud a complaint she had written against me for reckless water dispersion and potential structural damage to communal land. Her tone was pure theater. She looked at me like I was about to be banished from the neighborhood entirely. That's when I stood up, cleared my throat, and said I had something for the board to see. Ron helped me connect my laptop to the room's projector. As the screen came to life, the first video frame froze with Karen crouched over a trench, flashlight clenched in her teeth. The board members leaned forward. I hit play. A hush fell over the room as they watched the full sequence. Karen and her mystery worker digging up and fiddling with a pipe well after midnight. At one point, the man pulls out a plastic connector and hands it to her. Another frame shows Karen shoving dirt back into the hole with her shoe. Karen's face went from smug to stunned in seconds. She tried to interrupt, saying it was taken out of context, but no one was buying it. Ron asked her calmly if she could explain why she was handling underground pipes that didn't belong to her, and why those pipes were never registered. She stammered something about old connections and previous owners before turning red and shouting that I had invaded her privacy by filming her. I pointed out gently that everything was filmed from my property line, facing into mine, and that the footage was triggered by motion. Perfectly legal. She had no answer. That night ended in chaos. 2 board members called for an emergency review of Karen's actions. One neighbor, Elaine, who had been fined 3 times by Karen for having insufficiently pruned roses, stood up and accused her of illegally waiving her own HOA fees. Another demanded she step down as president until the matter was investigated. Karen stormed out, threatening lawsuits and calling the entire board biased and corrupt. But her words had lost their weight. The emperor had no clothes, or in this case, no permits. As I walked home that night, I looked over at Karen's house. The lights were off. Her perfect lawn was dimly lit by the glow of her front porch lamp, but it looked somehow smaller, less impressive. She had built her little empire on scare tactics, citations, and bullying, and now the foundation was cracking. I wasn't done yet. I had proof, I had witnesses, and something told me the city inspector I'd called earlier that day was going to find even more buried skeletons in her pipe. What Karen didn't understand was that messing with water lines wasn't just a neighborly nuisance. It was a legal landmine, and she had just stepped on it with both feet. 2 days after the HOA meeting exploded into chaos, a white city vehicle pulled up in front of Karen's house. I had been expecting it. After submitting the trail cam footage and the city diagrams that clearly showed no permitted storm drain connection for her property, I'd received a polite email from a city inspector named Victor. He didn't say much, just that he was following up on a potential utilities violation and would be in touch. But when I saw him step out of the vehicle wearing a fluorescent vest and holding a thick clipboard, I knew the follow-up was happening in real time. Victor took his time walking around her property's perimeter. I watched from my front porch, pretending to be watering the rose bush I didn't even care about, just so I could keep an eye on the show. Karen, predictably, burst out of her front door in a frantic rush, arms flailing, already talking before she even reached the sidewalk. I couldn't hear every word, but it was the usual. This is harassment. He doctored that video. The real problem is that man over there draining toxins into the neighborhood. Victor listened politely, then pointed toward the area behind her fence. Whatever he said, it wasn't what Karen wanted to hear. Her face tightened, and she turned on her heel and stormed back into the house without another word. A few minutes later, Victor knocked on my door. He was friendly, professional, and clearly not in the mood for drama. I handed over printed copies of the footage, the email exchange, and the city's own pipe diagrams. He nodded slowly as he skimmed the pages, then said something that made my stomach jump. This isn't just an HOA issue. If she's rerouted gray water or sewage into a storm system, that's a violation of environmental code. And if she used unlicensed labor to do it, that's 2 more infractions. I asked him what happens next. He simply said, "We dig." By that afternoon, a crew had been dispatched. A utility truck parked near the back alley behind Karen's property, and 2 workers started marking the ground with bright orange flags and spray paint. Karen came out again, this time with a phone pressed to her ear, likely trying to call in a favor or bluff someone into stopping the inspection. But nobody was listening to her anymore. The board had voted to freeze her powers as HOA president until further notice. Her once threatening citations were now just paper noise. She looked smaller somehow, standing there by the curb, her voice unheard, her little empire crumbling by the minute. Around that same time, something unexpected happened. One of the crew members knocked on my door, holding a clipboard, and asked if he could confirm where my drain line exited the property. I showed him the exact location, and he nodded, satisfied. "Yours is clean, hooked into the city line, sealed off properly. It's hers, that's weird." I asked what they found. He gave a short laugh and said, "She tapped 2 pipes. One goes into the storm drain, the other looks like it's drawing from an HOA-maintained irrigation loop. She's been watering her backyard with communal water, free of charge." I stood there, stunned for a second. Not only had Karen illegally routed her waste into a city drainage system meant for runoff and not sewage, but she had also tapped into the HOA's irrigation supply. That meant every time I paid my monthly dues, part of that was helping her keep her award-winning backyard looking pristine. The koi pond, the roses, the little herb maze she bragged about at every HOA meeting. All of it was fed with stolen water. I called Ron, the HOA secretary, and relayed what I'd been told. He didn't even sound surprised. "She's been running this place like her own private kingdom for years," he said. "I think we just finally pulled the curtain back." He said the board would be calling for a vote to audit Karen's past actions, including fines, rule changes, and any exemptions she may have created for herself. If she's been skipping payments or waiving her own fees, that's fraud. HOA or not, she's in real trouble. The next day, a formal notice was taped to Karen's front door by the city. Unauthorized utility connection detected. Immediate correction required. Karen tried to tear it down, but the ink left a smear across the door, and the adhesive was too strong to remove cleanly. It was a public scar now. A bright reminder to every neighbor that she wasn't above the rules anymore. That same afternoon, I saw a few of the more timid neighbors walking past her house slowly, pretending to be on a stroll but clearly trying to get a look at the infamous notice. One of them, an elderly lady named Patricia, who'd once been fined by Karen for having an improperly shaped mailbox, actually laughed out loud. But Karen wasn't done fighting. The following morning, a man in a battered white van pulled up in front of my house. He walked up the driveway carrying a thick file and introduced himself as Gregory, a licensed plumber hired by a concerned homeowner. I already knew who sent him. Gregory told me he was there to do an independent inspection of my drain lines. I politely declined, asking if he had a court order or HOA directive. When he said no, I told him he was trespassing. He left, but not before handing me a thick envelope full of paperwork that was obviously supposed to intimidate me, copies of bylaws, outdated city permits, and a weirdly worded letter accusing me of vandalism by overflow. I took the packet to a lawyer friend of mine, Sophia. She laughed halfway through reading it. "This is all smoke. None of it holds up. In fact," she said, flipping to the back page, "this plumber isn't even licensed in this state anymore. His number was revoked 6 months ago for safety violations. That was the final straw." I forwarded the info to the state plumbing board and included Gregory's business card. Within 24 hours, they confirmed he had violated state code by presenting himself as active, and they thanked me for the report. Meanwhile, the city's investigation continued, and the final report made its way to the HOA board. It included photographic evidence of the illegal pipe taps, a list of environmental violations, and a recommendation that Karen defined for contamination and forced to cover the costs of all repairs. The city also forwarded the report to the county prosecutor to review for potential misdemeanor charges. I couldn't believe it. The woman who once fined someone for having their recycling bin out past 10 o'clock a.m. on a Tuesday was now facing real legal consequences. As word spread through the neighborhood, things began to shift. People who had once avoided eye contact with Karen now spoke freely on walks. One neighbor, Olivia, even brought me a pie as a thank you, joking that my pool water had done more to clean up the HOA than any meeting ever had. I smiled, but I knew it wasn't over yet. Karen was the type who would burn the house down before handing over the keys. Something told me she still had cards to play. But this time, I had the upper hand. And all the receipts. The morning Karen received her court summons was the first time in years I saw her front lawn unattended. The hedges looked slightly overgrown. The mulch around her roses faded from sun exposure, and the koi pond, usually her pride and joy, sat still and murky. There were no chirping garden speakers playing soft jazz, no scent of her overused citrus cleaner wafting through the hedges, just silence and a large manila envelope taped to her door by the county sheriff. She didn't come out to take it until dusk, and when she did, she yanked it off the door like she was tearing off a bandage, then vanished back inside without a word. That envelope marked the beginning of a legal storm she hadn't seen coming. The charges, according to Ron, included unauthorized utility tapping, environmental code violations, and financial misconduct relating to her HOA role. There was also the matter of HOA funds. The board's audit had uncovered that Karen had been waiving her own HOA dues for nearly 3 years, using obscure footnotes she'd inserted into the digital record. She'd fined other residents over 70 times during that same period, but hadn't paid a single dime herself. In total, she owed over $9,000 to the HOA, not to mention the estimated $12,000 in stolen water use. The board scheduled a closed session vote for her permanent removal. Karen tried to block it with a cease and desist letter she hand-delivered to every board member's mailbox. It was printed on pink stationery with gold embossing and full of passive-aggressive legal threats that clearly hadn't been written by any lawyer. Ron read it aloud at a neighborhood meeting, and the room practically shook with laughter. It was the final nail in her presidency. The board voted unanimously to remove her, with over half the neighborhood attending in person just to witness the moment. Karen didn't take the loss gracefully. She showed up to the next open meeting anyway, even after being officially banned from board decisions. She barged in 10 minutes late, wearing sunglasses, a silk scarf, and an expression of righteous indignation. When Linda, the new interim HOA president, gently reminded her she had no authority, Karen tried to shout her down. "This is a kangaroo court," she yelled, pointing at the crowd. "None of you would even have property values if it weren't for me." The audience laughed again, some actually clapping. She stormed out after someone asked her if her koi pond was paying HOA dues yet. The city wasn't laughing. They took her illegal pipe tapping seriously, especially once the environmental inspection revealed that she'd rerouted more than just rainwater. Her old dishwasher line, laundry runoff, and even parts of her basement sump pump had been redirected into the industrial drain system. Worst, it had already caused minor contamination downstream near a public park, where children often played. The city slapped her with a citation demanding the immediate removal of all unapproved plumbing and a 5-figure environmental impact fee. Then came the twist no one expected. While city workers excavated the illegal lines behind her backyard, they uncovered something even worse, a series of unpermitted modifications to her storm shelter. It looked like she had added an underground extension that connected to the runoff line directly, possibly to use it as a covered drainage system. The construction had no engineering permits, and it violated multiple safety codes. One inspector remarked that it could have collapsed under heavy rain. They marked the structure for mandatory demolition and ordered a full inspection of her property foundation. That was the week the local news caught wind of the story. A reporter named Jason showed up at my door, asking if I wanted to give a statement. I declined, but he already had the city's violation list and was interviewing neighbors. The next morning, The segment aired under the headline, HOA President Faces Felony Charges for Pipe Fraud. They included a side-by-side image of Karen holding a gardening trophy from 2 years ago and her recent citation notice. My phone blew up with texts from neighbors laughing about it. Even my daughter, Emma, called from college just to say, "Dad, you're on TV. Did your pool really blow up a crime ring?" As satisfying as it all was, I wasn't celebrating yet. I knew Karen. She was the type to fight to her last breath, not because she thought she'd win, but because she couldn't stomach losing. Sure enough, 2 days before her court appearance, she filed a civil claim against me. She accused me of defamation, harassment, and unlawful surveillance. I laughed when I read it. My lawyer laughed harder. We filed a motion to dismiss immediately, attaching every legal permit, video timestamp, and HOA bylaw that proved she had no case. It was thrown out before it even made it to the preliminary hearing. Karen showed up to court in a beige pantsuit and oversized sunglasses, escorted by a man she claimed was her new attorney. He was later revealed to be a paralegal friend from a Facebook group. The judge, unimpressed with her theatrics, cut through her arguments like butter. He pointed out that the evidence was overwhelming, that the city inspectors had verified the illegal connections, and that she'd knowingly evaded fees while holding a position of trust. When Karen tried to deflect by blaming her late husband for old plumbing choices, the judge flatly asked why she was seen personally modifying pipes in the surveillance footage. She had no answer. He ruled against her on every count. She was fined $17,000 in restitution, ordered to repay the HOA in full, and placed under supervision for all future construction or utility work on her property. Worst of all for Karen, the court mandated that a visible compliance notice be posted in her yard for 90 days, a bright orange sign, 4 feet tall, with a list of violations in bold black font. That sign became the newest attraction in the neighborhood. Kids took selfies in front of it. One guy, Mitch, dressed it up in a Santa hat and beard when December rolled around. And yet, even with the entire community watching her downfall, Karen couldn't fully let go. She continued submitting petty complaints through anonymous emails about garbage bins, porch lights, unapproved fence paint. We knew it was her. The writing style was unmistakable, but no one responded anymore. Linda installed a filter that automatically archived anything sent from her address. Karen's reign was over. Her power was gone. All she had left was a koi pond full of regret and a garden that no one cared to compliment anymore. For me, it felt like the air had finally cleared. No more passive-aggressive warnings, no more surprise fines or threatening notes in my mailbox. I could mow my lawn in peace, clean my gutters without fear, and yes, drain my pool whenever the heck I wanted. Karen had thought she could use HOA rules as weapons and bury her crimes under layers of paperwork and fear. But in the end, the truth flowed out like the water from my pool, uncontrollable, undeniable, and absolutely soaking her in consequences. Spring rolled in like a breath of fresh air, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt alive. You could feel it in the way people started gathering on sidewalks again, sharing coffee and lawn care tips without watching their backs for a clipboard or a fine. The HOA office, once a place of dread thanks to Karen's reign, had become a casual pit stop with a small bulletin board now filled with cheerful notes, yard sale flyers, and even a community barbecue announcement. The orange violation sign finally came down from Karen's front yard on a windy Wednesday afternoon, but the image of it had already become something of a legend. A few neighbors joked about turning it into a garden decoration or, better yet, framing it for the new HOA clubhouse wall as a reminder of what not to do when given power. Karen, meanwhile, became something of a ghost. Her once vibrant yard, once perfectly manicured with geometric hedges and imported orchids, had withered into dry patches of grass and mulch dust. With the illegal irrigation hookup severed, she now had to rely on standard municipal water like the rest of us. And that meant pain, which clearly didn't sit well with her. She tried to haul buckets during the evening hours, dragging them from her bathtub to the yard in what must have been an exhausting and increasingly desperate ritual. I caught her once, sloshing water in mismatched slippers at dusk, huffing like a defeated gladiator. We locked eyes for a second, and she looked away immediately, pretending to be inspecting her azaleas. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The koi pond went first. Without her rigged system pumping fresh filtered water, it quickly turned into a greenish stoop. I heard from a neighbor that she tried to secretly refill it using her washing machine hose, but had been caught on a Ring camera spraying pond water all over her back deck. The HOA, now firmly under new leadership, gave her a friendly but firm warning to stop abusing the plumbing or risk a lion. Karen grumbled about it at the next open meeting, where she was still allowed to attend but only as a regular resident. Nobody took her seriously anymore. She would raise her hand to speak, and people would suddenly remember they had errands to run or would start checking their phones with exaggerated interest. Linda, now officially elected as HOA president, made good on her promises to reform the organization. The first thing she did was erase half of the petty regulations Karen had put in place over the years, banning seasonal flags, bird feeders, certain wind chimes, even specific flower types. It turned out Karen had written over 50 micro rules in her time, almost all of which served her own tastes and convenience. Gone. All of them. Replaced with clear, minimal guidelines focused on safety and respect. A few of us were so impressed we helped repaint the HOA office, added a little lending library box near the walkway, and even planted a small flower bed. For once, we had pride in where we lived, not fear of who might be watching. Then came the final twist. About a month after the court ruling, Linda received a sealed envelope from the county records office. Inside was a series of handwritten documents Karen had submitted during her time in office, unfiled, unapproved, but stored in the HOA's internal archives. Among them was a contractor letter dated 2 years earlier, instructing a team to route storm excess quietly along pre-existing lines and avoid city permit delays by tapping the southern line after dark. The contractor's signature was smudged, but the note was unmistakably in Karen's handwriting. The kicker: attached to it was a receipt from a local hardware store with a timestamp that matched the trail cam footage almost perfectly. Linda showed it to the board, and without hesitation, they voted to archive the letter in a new folder titled HOA Historical Disasters. It was petty. It was beautiful. It was deserved. Life moved on. I finished resurfacing my pool and even added new LED lights around the edges. The kids loved it when they visited, and the neighbors sometimes brought their dogs over to run around my yard. With Karen defanged, the neighborhood felt human again. I noticed little things that had once disappeared under her watch. Kids drawing chalk art on sidewalks, elderly folks walking hand in hand without being glared at for using the wrong color umbrella. Freedom returned in strange, subtle ways. It felt earned. Karen's house began to look more like a relic than a home. The blinds were always drawn, her car rarely left the driveway. Once I caught a glimpse of her pacing by the window while a city worker trimmed a tree too close to her property. She didn't come out to yell. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching helplessly. The woman who once summoned enforcement over mailbox color was now too afraid to speak up about actual maintenance. Karma, it turns out, doesn't shout. It just waits patiently. One afternoon, while trimming my hedges, I saw a small moving truck pull into Karen's driveway. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was redecorating or clearing space. But then a group of movers came out carrying framed photos, a boxed-up fountain statue, and a bundle of gardening tools. She emerged a few minutes later, wearing dark sunglasses and clutching a ceramic pot, and for a moment I thought she might try to say something. She didn't. She got into the passenger seat of a tan SUV and left without a word. Just like that, she was gone. Later that week, a for sale by owner sign appeared in her yard. The house stayed quiet for a while, and then a young couple toured it with a realtor. I couldn't help but hope they wouldn't ask too many questions about the drain system. Or maybe I hoped they would. Maybe it would be good for the house to remember what happened, for the roots of this place to carry the story of what it meant when one person tried to own more than just her yard, when she tried to control the air, the rules, the water beneath the soil. As for me, I kept to my projects, built a new garden box, finally installed the solar lights I'd been putting off for 2 summers, and got around to restaining the deck. Every once in a while, I'd glance at where Karen's yard used to gleam with fake perfection and think about how quickly things can change when someone forgets that neighborhoods are made of people, not policies. Her downfall wasn't dramatic or violent. It wasn't even particularly loud. It was steady, inevitable, and soaked in irony. All it took was a little pool water to uncover everything. And in the end, the woman who thought she could control the flow was the one who drowned in her own lies.